Welcome back to Defence Talks, Securing UK Advantage, a podcast brought to you by the Council on Geostrategy in partnership with trade association ADS Group and sponsored by industry powerhouse BAE Systems. Our podcast discusses key questions that shape defence, technological and national security agendas in the UK and explores the main themes in British defence in the context of intensifying geopolitical competition. In September 2021, Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States announced a new trilateral security and defence partnership designed to preserve security and stability in the Indo-Pacific. The agreement will, alongside other areas of cooperation, support the delivery of a conventionally armed and nuclear-powered submarine capability for Australia, the SSNN AUKUS, which is to be built in Britain and Australia. However, the submarine program is just Pillar 1 of the AUKUS agreement. The partnership will also focus on the development and delivery of state-of-the-art military capabilities under Pillar 2 and is expected to begin consultation with other countries, such as Japan, on areas of advanced military capabilities later this year. Therefore, in this episode, we will discuss what is AUKUS, what it means for our defence industrial base, the development of science and technology, and our security and prosperity. I'm Victoria Starrick-Summerlin, co-founder and director of strategy at the Council on Geostrategy, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the Honourable Stephen Smith, the Australian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, and Jeff Lewis, Vice President, Defence, ADS Board. The Honourable Stephen Smith is the Australian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. He was first elected as a federal member for Perth for the Australian Labor Party in 1993 and served as Minister for Foreign Affairs between 2007 and 2010, Minister for Trade in 2010, and Minister for Defence from 2010 to 2013. His Excellency was also instrumental in leading Australia's Defence Strategic Review of 2023. Jeff Lewis is the Vice President for Defence on the ADS Board. Jeff joined Raytheon UK in 2019 with a 5-year stint as Chief Operating Officer, retiring in May 2024. He is also a member of the Defence Suppliers Forum Executive Group, sits on the Defence Growth Partnership Steering Group, chairs the DSF Mid-Tier Group, and works collaboratively across industry and with the government via the UK Defence Solutions Centre and the Defence Industry Liaison Board to support UK industry and experts. So, Excellency and Jeff, welcome to this podcast episode.
Thanks very much, Victoria.
Thank you very much.
Let's begin with a very simple question, and it's a challenging one, I guess. I would like to ask you to describe in one sentence, what is AUKUS? High Commissioner.
Well, AUKUS is an advanced technology partnership between three close national friends, Australia, United Kingdom and United States.
Jeff?
Well, I'd reiterate that. I certainly wouldn't want to outdo the High Commissioner, but I think it will also build on that close partnership to expand to reach into even further technology as we move forward.
High Commissioner, what does it mean? What opportunities does it bring?
I think AUKUS arises as a result of changed strategic circumstances, and there are two pillars to AUKUS, as you know. There's the construction of nuclear-powered but conventionally armed submarines, which will be eventually constructed in Port Osborne in Adelaide. But it's also an advanced technology partnership in Pillar 2, which is aimed at ensuring that the three members of the partnership work together in very much a free trade agreement environment to exchange technology and to advance technology in a manner which puts warfighting capability into the hands of a warfighter, not for the purposes of starting or fighting a war, but for the purposes of integrated defence and deterrence. And so it's really the technology piece which is deeply significant, because that can transcend across hypersonics, underwater submersibles, direct energy, weapons, advanced cyber, artificial intelligence and the like. And any other aspects of advanced technology become of interest to the three partners. And in some respects you can say if Pillar 2 fails, then AUKUS has failed, because if all you wanted to do was to build submarines, then you could just have a big submarine project. Now, the submarine project is a very big submarine project. It's a huge national endeavour, but nonetheless, if all we were doing was dealing with content that we're all very familiar with, then it wouldn't have the same potential that Jeff, I think, alludes to, which is a deep integrated partnership on significant advanced technology, not just over the next year or decade, but for very many decades to come.
I would agree with what Stephen has said there, and I think it goes more than that, because what has been proven over the last 2 to 3 years with the conflicts as they have arisen around the world is that you also don't just need that technology partnership to move forward. You need that resilience. You need the opportunity to be manufacturing, having capability in different countries rather than all lodged in your own area. At the beginning of the Ukraine, well, firstly, let's start with COVID and the shutdown of supply chains worldwide. That caused a huge problem to the defence sector. Then we moved through to a Ukraine conflict, potential conflicts in the Indo-Pacific that could result in shortages of supply chain everywhere. So by 3 major world powers working together in a collaborative fashion, we can ensure that not only can we develop the technology, we'll have that resilience of manufacture across all 3 areas.
I think Jeff's point about the productive capability is a really important point. And so part of, and submarines is a very good example, part of the aspiration of AUKUS is to add to the combined Australia, UK, US productive capability. In the case of submarines, when AUKUS SSN is being produced in Port Osborne in Adelaide in South Australia, on a good day by 2038, on a bad day by 2042, then that would have added an additional train to the production of nuclear-powered submarines. That adds significantly to the production of like-minded partners, deterrence, and we're going through a strategic circumstance where the notion of regional balancing strategies and integrated defence and deterrence are deeply significant. Because what we want to do is not to be well armed for a conflict, but to prevent a conflict from occurring in the first place. So adding to that productive capability is very important and essential. And Jeff's point, it was in part COVID which saw us realise the risks that were placed to our supply chains, not just in the defence context, but very squarely in the defence context. And that's now caused us to say, well, we need to be looking very carefully at the diversity and security of our supply chains and looking to like-minded partners to share in the burden and opportunity of that supply chain. So all of these things become interlinked and interwoven, and then you have the UK and the United States alliance partners, Australia and the US alliance partners, and then Australia and the UK, deeply close partners, share history, share culture, very like-minded. And AUKUS has been one of the things which has reminded Australia and the UK of just how like-minded we are and just how easy it is to work together. It's not to say we don't have differences or nuances or see things differently, but the like-mindedness between our 2 countries, our 2 defence forces, our security agencies and the like, makes it very easy to try and come to grips with these very large national long-standing projects.
Absolutely. Shared history and values and cooperation, of course, are very important elements when it comes to AUKUS. But Jeff, it's been 3 years since AUKUS was announced. What has happened since then?
I think people sometimes, and in my role in the ADS, I go to a Defence Sector Council, I go to a board meeting, and people, well, nothing's happened. But quite a lot has happened in terms of the progress that's been made. So firstly, around the submarine, there's a commitment to build this SSN AUKUS. It's going to be based around the replacement submarine for the Astute class submarine. Secondly, I'm aware that the UK have committed to regular visits of their nuclear fleet to Australia, and from 2027 there'll be a rotational submarine always in and around Australia from either the US or the UK, and that's a huge movement in terms of enhancing capability and knowledge in that area. And then moving on to Pillar 2, which is slightly different, some steadier progress on Pillar 2. People keep on saying slower. I'd prefer to refer to it as steadier progress. But for most of industry, either in Australia, the US and the UK, that offers the greatest opportunity to get involved because it covers such a wide range of technology and capabilities. So things have started to move forward in that there has been a lot of background work taking place to ensure that the collaboration can take place on a much easier basis. It would seem simple with three nations that have a long history, but we each have our own laws and rules around exports, imports, around cyber and the way that we work. So teams have been set up to look at the ways of working to ensure that collaboration can be done much more effectively as we move forward.
Well, we're looking at two distinct projects which are sort of decades long. And so these are great national endeavours, and we have to get things right from the outset. We have to be at it day in, day out. But also we need to understand that some of the outcomes we won't see for decades on end. If you look at, in the first instance, submarines, a significant amount has occurred. We had our AUKUS meeting between our two foreign and defence ministers in Adelaide in March, and in the margins of the AUKUS meeting, substantial announcements were made in Port Osborne and Adelaide about Australia's choice of builder of the submarine, which will be BAE in joint venture with the Australian Submarine Corporation. Also maintenance, which will be the Australian Submarine Corporation, but in conjunction with other partners. And there are British companies and American companies which take part in nuclear submarine maintenance, so they'll all have their chance to partake in that. Also, Australia making a significant contribution to the industrial productive capacity of the United Kingdom in the submarine area, whether that's BAE infrastructure or Rolls-Royce, but also the same occurring in the United States. So that notion that Jeff mentioned and I reinforce about adding to the productive capacity, there have been significant contributions by Australia to start that. We've also been signing off on decisions at ministerial level for long lead items with Rolls-Royce that will be required for the actual production of the nuclear-powered submarines in Port Adelaide in the 2040s. So these are very long, enduring projects. But if we were told back in 21 by the middle of 2024, you'll be at this point in the cycle in terms of the submarine project, we would have said, we'll snap on that, we'll take that, we'll pocket that. So I think we've made very good progress. And a couple of anecdotal statistics which reflect that. As High Commissioner, Jeff would know, often the High Commissioner is called upon to try and prevent things from going up the chain to ministers. Don't bother Canberra or Westminster unless you have to. And so we put in place a system which was Australia, our submarine agency, and the MOD and MOD Nuclear, which was in the early days, if we have a problem, let's see if we can resolve it ourselves on the ground at operational level and use the High Commissioner if we need to. In the early days, so last year, 2023, I would have been asked on a dozen occasions to intervene, all of which were done amicably and all resolved. It's just a way of people reminding themselves how they work. The UK, with decades-long experience, centuries-long experience in this area of activity, and Australia being deeply experienced in submarines but new to the nuclear aspect of it. So a dozen or so this year, and if it wasn't in February, it was in January. I've been asked on one occasion. So that tells you the system is working, that at officer level, we've worked out, here's where the Aussies are coming from, here's where the Brits are coming from, we can do this together. And so that's a very good sign. On AUKUS Pillar 2, we always knew that Pillar 2 would be the second cab off the rank. And we also knew that in some respects it was always going to be much more complex, because with submarines, in the end, it's one piece of content, it's a submarine. Now, it's a very big submarine, it's a very complex submarine, and for Australia, it's the first time we've embarked upon the nuclear-powered notion of that, and there are stewardship responsibilities which we must discharge with respect to that. But with Pillar 2, you've got a variety of named advanced technologies, some of which I mentioned earlier, hypersonics, advanced cyber, submersibles and the like, but also plenty of other suggestions in advanced technology areas that industry may want to make to government, or government may want to discern themselves. You've also got a mix of public and private, so there will always be some public intellectual property in the advanced technology, but at the same time you'll have private IP which could be held by large corporations, but also small, emerging, small and medium-sized tech companies. So piecing together the public IP and the private IP and the different cultures of public and private, and then 3 different governments, makes life complex. And so we've been spending a lot of time trying to work through how do we make sure we effectively have, for intellectual property purposes and for defence export control purposes, effectively a free trade agreement between Australia, the US and the UK within that environment. So that's taken us a bit of time to grip up, but I think we did very well in the last quarter of last year with ministerial meetings of the 3 AUKUS ministers and some public announcements there. And we've also made it clear that we see a pathway for other advanced technological countries to, at some point in the process, to potentially share in particular projects or particular programs. And in the context of the US-Japan summit recently, Japan was mentioned as a possibility. And Australia's view is we should find a pathway for Japan. But equally, there are other like-minded countries, our Five Eyes partners, Canada and New Zealand, the Republic of Korea, all of whom have got plenty of capability in advanced technologies, who may well be able to make a contribution to a particular project or program. And we're working our way through that, and our ambition is by the end of this year to know precisely the definition of the particular programs and projects, and then to find a pathway for what some people have described as AUKUS Plus. There'll only be 3 members of AUKUS, but we do see advantages in having other like-minded, innovation-capable countries joining to particular programs or projects.
We'll get back to AUKUS Plus question a bit later in the recording, and I'd like to hear your views on this question in a couple of minutes. But I guess let's try to take a step back and put AUKUS into a wider geopolitical context. So in your view, High Commissioner, how do both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 address existing geopolitical challenges that all 3 nations face?
Yeah. Well, AUKUS would not exist unless we were dealing with changed strategic circumstances. And here, whilst they're a couple of years apart, you can see precisely the same analysis of our geostrategic circumstances in Australia as you do in the UK. So in 2021, June 2021, Australia published what we describe as a Defence Strategic Update. And that said strategic circumstances had changed and Australia would no longer have a 10-year planning time that we've traditionally relied upon in the post-World War years. In other words, if we're going to be subject to an exigency, how long do we have to observe that and prepare for it? And our planning time has been 10 years. So in June of 2021, we said 10 years is gone, you have to start preparing for the moment. That was followed up by our Defence Strategic Review, which I co-chaired together with Angus Houston, a former Secretary of the Defence Force, former Chief of the Defence Force, CDF, and we handed over our report to government in February of 2023, and the government published it in April of 2023. Meanwhile, the UK was doing its integrated review firstly, and then its refresh. And Angus Houston and I collaborated with like-minded colleagues, with New Zealand, with the US, but also with John Bew and his team here. And we were struck by just how remarkably close our analysis and our strategic assessment and our view about challenges and opportunities were. And so the integrated review refresh talks in terms of China as being a epoch-changing strategic circumstance. In other words, the rise of a great power, and a great power who potentially has a different view about the rules of the road than we've traditionally seen observed since the end of World War II. In the Australian context, we said we have to focus on, absolutely and solely focus on the major strategic change circumstances. So different terminology, but nonetheless, how do we deal with, manage and grapple with the rise of a great power? And as a consequence of that, the general notion in Australia in terms of we need to engage in a regional balancing strategy, we need to engage in integrated defence and deterrence, and that forms the backdrop for not just AUKUS, which we've been referring to, but also other minilateral groups throughout the Indo-Pacific, but also globally. And so you see the re-emergence of the Quad, Australia, India, US, Japan. You see the emergence of what some people are now calling the Squad, which includes the Philippines, AUKUS, but then other minilaterals or trilaterals, Australia, US, Japan, India, Indonesia, Australia, in a time of strategic competition between US and China, but also in a multipolar world where there are other centres of influence and power. These overlapping sort of circles of influence are very helpful in Australia's view, because they send a signal that it's not just a competition between US and China. There are other like-minded countries or other countries who have a view, influence and a role to play in the balance of these vectors or forces.
Jeff, in your view, how does AUKUS bolster the security of the United Kingdom?
Well, I think in many ways it helps restore that deterrence factor, and Stephen mentioned that briefly in his earlier comments. If we've learned nothing else over the past few years, we've got to ensure that we demonstrate to our adversaries that we have that capability, we have that war-fighting competitive edge, we have resilience, we have the stockpiles, we have the ability to increase at pace to produce armaments. And I think if we can do that, that's going to improve not just the security of Australia and the US, it improves the security of the UK. And I think that ability that we talked about earlier about choosing the right partners, and whether that's the three within AUKUS or these minilaterals that Stephen referred to earlier, allows for that burden sharing to ensure that we can bring all of that capability together. As UK, we were recently involved in Planned Force Testing 10, which worked out what we would need to do as a UK against a particular set of threats. I think some of the outcomes of that reinforce the plans that we're already moving forward with on AUKUS.
So AUKUS presents a big opportunity for our defence industrial base and also our science and technology base. Could you please perhaps provide your view on what are these opportunities and what should we be focusing on?
So I'd start with science and technology. If you talk around the capabilities that are specifically within Pillar 2, for example, these are pretty cutting edge in terms of where they are. And so we'll start around not even with SMEs, we might even be talking about the work that's being researched in universities or in high-end colleges or in research institutions around the technology that you need to have to deliver some of those capabilities. You know, people talk about hypersonics. If you see some of the maths, you see some of the physics behind hypersonics. This really is cutting-edge metallurgy and physics to ensure that you can deliver that capability. That starts with the great education and science institutions that we have within Australia, the UK and the US, and then that feeds through into these small SMEs that work with the larger, medium and large prime contractors to bring that technology to market. So I think Pillar 2, whether you're talking about hypersonics, artificial intelligence, advanced EW, cyber, attack or defence, these are capabilities that we have to involve and develop that will be far-reaching through the whole of the sector, from science through to SMEs and to the big prime contractors.
And when it comes to our defence industrial base, what are the main opportunities that you see?
So I think there are opportunities. I get asked. I chair a Defence Sector Council within the ADS on a bi-monthly basis, and we regularly have briefings on AUKUS from the industrial partners that sit within the UK side of it, and we have briefings from the UK MOD representatives as well. And all of industry are keen to see where they can add, whether it's around specific pockets of software, specific pockets of technology around uncrewed systems, underwater systems, advanced sensors, quantum. Quantum blows my mind most days when I even try to think about it and trying to describe it. I really struggle with, but all these things are game-changing in terms of what we can offer, and I think they will offer great opportunities for the whole industrial base within the UK.
High Commissioner, in your view, are we good at communicating the importance of AUKUS to our societies across 3 countries, or are there some ways to improve further still?
Well, I think we're very good at communicating the security implications to the defence, intelligence, security networks in our various jurisdictions. I think we're good at articulating the security implications to a broader audience as well. I don't think we've been as good as Jeff has just done in articulating the enormous economic, science and technology opportunities which come as a result of these great national security endeavours. And so with Pillar 1, with the submarine project, whilst often people just think in terms of cutting steel and building a hull, and it's an enormous hull, it's the extraordinarily complex, deep data technology, devices, weapon systems, communication system, detection systems that go into the hull and the submarine, which make it an enormous technological venture. And what that does is a defence venture of that nature has automatically a ripple effect into defence generally, a ripple effect into skills, into knowledge, understanding, but also it has a deep supply chain effect. And so what you see, for example, with the construction of submarines in Barrow-in-Furness is that has a deep supply chain effect throughout the Midlands and the north of the UK. And it has a big effect in terms of the infrastructure, the education, the tertiary skills and training required in that area and generally. And so the effect of AUKUS SSN means that there will be a level below which investment into Barrow-in-Furness will never fall after a particular period of time, and the same in Port Adelaide, in South Australia. That means whether it's Adelaide or Barrow-in-Furness, you've got to have deep supply chains throughout your region, in the case of South Australia, throughout your state. But you've also got to grow the area with the project. And that means education, roads, infrastructure, housing, education and the like. So it has an enormous flow-on effect in terms of general economy and skills and opportunities for generations.
And can I just build on that a little bit, Stephen? You know, I sat there one day and I did some simple maths, and if you look at the commitments that just the UK and Australia have made in terms of their increasing their defence budgets closer to 2.5%, and the billions of pounds or Aussie dollars that's going to generate, these are not hundreds of jobs, these are tens of thousands of jobs, and that's got to start by investment in schools, tertiary colleges, universities, creation of apprenticeships, because all of that is going to be the feedstock of capability that we're going to need in the future to deliver all this to the UK, the US and Australia.
And that's particularly in the context of currently our single biggest challenge in all of our AUKUS and defence and security ventures generally is finding the people to do the job. So we need to, and we can't poach from each other. There's no point the Brits stealing the Aussies and vice versa. We have to grow our capability in human stock, and we need to do that together. And there'll also be ebbs and flows. So at some point in the work schedule, there'll be more work in Adelaide than there will be in Barrow. And the notion of transferring people from Barrow working on exactly the same submarine design and model to Adelaide is not inconceivable, in decades' time. But growing our workforce, growing our skills, growing our capability is deeply important to the success of these ventures. But I've been to Barrow now with the Australian Prime Minister, the Australian Defence Minister, the Australian Defence Industry Minister, with 2 UK Defence Secretaries, and with the South Australian Premier. And when the South Australian Premier was there, he walked out of the Skills and Training Centre at Barrow saying, I now need to construct at least one of these in Adelaide. I have to grow my education, grow my skills, grow my training. The investment into the cutting of the steel and the submarine will come as a natural consequence. But I've now got to work out what's the infrastructure improvements, what's the education improvement, what's the community improvement, and the housing improvement, because without that, the job won't be able to be done. And that just sends enormous benefits through a community, whether it's Barrow, whether it's Cheshire, whether it's Adelaide, whether it's South Australia.
But it's interestingly even more fundamental than that, because we've got to convince parents to encourage their children that STEM is important. Yes, there'll be loads of jobs outside of STEM, I get that, but at the core, these are engineering projects. So we have to ensure that we can create that feedstock of STEM qualified people who are interested in being in this sector.
Absolutely right. And the South Australian Premier walked out of Barrow saying to himself, I've now got to think about how I encourage young boys and girls who are currently 5 years of age in pre-primary school, how they're going to be attracted to this project as they go through primary school, secondary school, apprenticeships, technical and further education, university. How do I capture their imagination to grow that workforce?
And I think there has to be a key partnership between industry and government to make that happen, because industry has got to look attractive. Government has got to facilitate the capability to deliver the people.
Absolutely.
And also education institutions, I guess.
Of course. As part of that, we've got to create that demand signal.
100%. Yes.
So that university and institutions understand that if they create these courses, people will come, and when they can go to highly paid jobs afterwards, more people come to the courses. It's like a circular economy in many ways.
We've referred to the fact that AUKUS is, of course, a long-term partnership, and undoubtedly we will most likely see a changing geopolitical and political landscape in the upcoming years and decades. Now, what are these potential challenges when it comes to changing political situation, and how is this partnership designed to mitigate against them? High Commissioner.
Well, when we did the Defence Strategic Review, one of our recommendations was we need to start doing what we described as national defence strategies every 2 years. We came from a history where the traditional policy tool for defence and security was a defence white paper. And sometimes you would discover that you do a defence white paper in 2002 and you don't do another one until 2009, and then you do one in 2013, 2016 and 2019. And so we said, look, the world is changing so quickly, both in terms of potentially strategic and security settings, but also technology, that we've got to get into a regular cadence of doing these strategic documents. From 1-2 years to another 2 years, there might be minimal change, but equally something might occur which is dramatic change over that period. But let's just start doing them in an orderly fashion, which means it doesn't take you 18 months to do them when you come around to do them, but you are continually updating what your view of strategic circumstances are. So in the case of the Defence Strategic Review, which we handed over in February and publicly released by the government in April of 23, and then the recent National Defence Strategy, which was also April, but 12 months on April 2024 this year, there's a slight tweak in strategic circumstances. If it's not paragraph 2 of the report, it's paragraph 3, which says, since the Defence Strategic Review looked at our strategic circumstances, we've seen a slight change to that, another development, which is the collaboration between China, Russia, North Korea and Iran. And so that was just stated as this is a development, not necessarily a beneficial or a helpful development, nonetheless a development. So that's picked up pretty quickly. So our strategic circumstances always change. One thing which I think both the National Defence Strategy but also the AUKMIN meeting, which I referred to earlier, really shone a light on is that in the modern era, in strategic circumstances now, what occurs in the Indo-Pacific reverberates in the Euro-Atlantic theatre and vice versa. So why is Australia in Ukraine? Well, Australia is in Ukraine because if might is right and might is allowed to win in Ukraine, then that sends a very bad signal to the rest of the world. And so we're helping out training of Ukrainians in the Salisbury Plain. We've delivered funds to the national fund. We've had, very importantly in my view, our wedge-tail plane doing work in Europe. But we're sending that signal because what occurs in Ukraine reverberates. So the notion that whilst the UK and Australia might still be geographically very far apart, the modern world has thrown us together in terms of what occurs here has repercussions for what occurs in the Indo-Pacific and vice versa. So our strategic circumstances will always change, and China is not a monolith, and there's no point not having a conversation with China, because after Xi Jinping finishes as president of China, whenever that occurs, and secretary of the CCP, whenever that occurs, there'll be other opportunities. China is a country that we can't not talk to on the great global issues, so we can't ignore China. We need to talk to China. We need to find those areas where we can cooperate, but also be very strong about those areas where we need to send signals that what China might be contemplating is not appropriate in terms of the rules of the road. So we need to continually monitor those changes, and as we've seen historically, strategic circumstances will change, and countries and parties will tweak and adjust accordingly. We think we're better off doing that in an incremental way as we see change occur, rather than having long gaps of time between we make those changes.
Jeff, any potential risks that you see happening in the upcoming years or decades that can affect the long-term partnership?
I think we probably discussed them. I would agree with all of Stephen's comments about the tweaks, and the collaboration is going to make that easier. Fundamentally, the US, the UK, Australia, many nations place the safety and security of its citizens as its number one priority. So, if you start with that as your number one priority, tweaking around what you have to do to ensure that is done will still mean that AUKUS is real, relevant, and will continue to operate. I think some more collaboration around the skill base, and the supply chain resilience across the world is a deep thread of work that's going to need a lot more work. And I've seen the work that's been started by the AUKUS Advanced Capabilities Industry Forum, where there are 3 trade bodies from the 3 countries working with government ministers. That gives the opportunity to start spreading that information out there in terms of how we get supply chain ready, how we get people ready to ensure that we can deliver it.
We have only a couple of minutes left, and we started our conversation today with a small challenge, and we tried and succeeded in describing what is AUKUS within one sentence. So looking into the future, I would like to ask you to summarize in 2 or 3 sentences what is next for AUKUS. High Commissioner.
What is next for AUKUS, I think, is really gripping up successfully Pillar 2 and getting outcomes on our advanced technology partnership. I'm very confident we're on track both in Australia, the UK and the US on our submarine project, not underestimating the enormous challenge of that. I think we've now got to grip up Pillar 2 and start showing some outcomes on Pillar 2.
What about AUKUS Plus?
Well, I think outcomes on Pillar 2 will see necessarily and desirably, in my view, AUKUS Plus partners in some of those technology projects.
I think what we need to do is to create that right enabling environment to ensure that the success that has started will continue to grow. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to deliver that.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you very much, High Commissioner, for your time and for your insights on this very important topic. And thank you for listening to Defence Talk, Securing UK Advantage, brought to you by the Council on Geostrategy in partnership with ATS and sponsored by industry powerhouse BAE Systems. If you would like to submit a question for our next episode, please email them to defencetalks@geostrategy.org.uk. You can find our upcoming podcast episodes on our website, and please visit www.geostrategy.org.uk/defencetalks. Until next time.